Good afternoon. I'm Councilman Michael Nowakowski, the Chair of the Public Safety and Veterans Subcommittee, and welcome to our committee. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of October 14th?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion passes. I'm going to move out of order item number 4 in front of call to the public because we have individuals that are here to receive a banner. I've been on the council for about 8 years, and since those 8 years, I've attended about 7 different funerals of fallen police officers and firefighters. 3 years ago, after attending one of the funeral masses of a fallen police officer, I thought it was really important, and I talked to some of my colleagues and our district staff, and to create a Memorial Day event at the Cesar Chavez Park on 35th Avenue and Baseline. And we have fireworks, we have testimonies from family members of the fallen police officers and firefighters. And one of the things that I've noticed during those testimonies is that they're not just police officers and firefighters that are here on this earth to protect and to serve, but they also, what they do off time. They're volunteer in our little leagues, in our football and baseball leagues, and they are involved in their churches and in our communities as volunteers. And just to hear the testimonies from their family members, from their friends and their partners of how much our police officers and firefighters get involved in the community, I thought it was so important to create an event. And at the same time, it's not just an event. We created what we call a Heroes Lane, and down Baseline Road from 35th Avenue to 51st Avenue, we have a banner and a picture of all the fallen officers on our street poles. And that started 3 years ago. And then last year we started getting calls from schools asking for the bios of our fallen police officers and firefighters because they were taking field trips down Baseline Road and they were teaching their students about the fallen officers and firefighters. So we created a website where we have all the bios and the histories of these fallen heroes of ours. And last year, we were able to raise enough money to actually have a second Heroes Lane, which came down Washington Street, all the way from 7th Street to 7th Avenue. And it's just amazing of the stories that we hear. So today, we're here to give out 22 of those banners to those fallen, for those family members that have allowed their loved ones to serve this great city of ours and to protect our city. And I just really want to say thank you. Thank you for allowing your loved ones, your husbands, your spouses to protect and to serve and to make this one of the greatest cities that we have and the safest cities. With that, I'm not sure if any of my colleagues, before we hand them out, would like to have any comments.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think I congratulate you on what you've done to honor them. I think it's really important what we're doing today, least we forget. I think it's a great reminder to this community of the officers, whether they're police or fire, who have served and gave their all for us, and let them never be forgotten and always appreciated.
So in being a police officer and a firefighter, it takes a lot of sacrifice. And a lot of the sacrifice is with the family and being away from the family and the time. But also one of the greatness of it is the courage and honor and the strength that they have in order to protect us. And so I want to thank the families who have made the ultimate sacrifice of not having their loved one here, but still honoring them and in a day-to-day and a memory for them. And so thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
And sitting on this subcommittee, we're privy to get reports on a daily basis of all the activities of our police officers and firefighters. And sometimes when you read those reports, it sounds like a Hollywood movie or an episode on one of these TV shows that you have our police officers and firefighters rescuing individuals, going after the bad guys and rescuing children and basically going into an individual shooting back at them. And I just want to really thank you all for allowing your parents, your loved ones, your spouses, your sons and daughters to serve as public safety individuals. And, and I just want to tell the public out there that when you see a police officer, when you see a firefighter, every time they put on that uniform, every time they walk out in the streets, they're there to protect and to serve. They're willing to give their lives for us. And we have 48 heroes that have given their ultimate service is their lives for the city of Phoenix. And that's what we're here to honor today. So with that, we're going to have our council member Williams read off the name of the individual and the family member that's here to receive the banner that we've hung down Washington Street from 7th Street to 7th Avenue.
The first honoree is Golay Buff. Lori Buff is accepting. Is Lori here? Next is Ignacio Conchas, accepted by Maria Garcia. George Cortez, accepted by Tiffany Cortez. John Wayne Dublinsky by Thelma Dublinsky. David Kiefer, accepted by Diane Kiefer. Travis Murphy, accepted by Danielle Murphy. Robert Palmanier by Charmaine Osborne. Daryl Reitz, accepted by Stephanie. Don Schultz, accepted by Lisa Schultz. Burl Wayne Scott, accepted by Alyssa Scott. Danny Tunney, accepted by Jamie Tunney White. David Uribe, accepted by Carrie Uribe. Eric White, accepted by Colleen White. Jason Wolf, accepted by Tara Wolf. Leonard Cola, I'm sorry, Cole Dougie. Am I getting close? No? Kalaji, okay. Leonard Kalaji, accepted by his daughter and wife. Next, we want to honor the firefighters, Mark Carter, with Lene Carter accepting. Timothy Hale, with Jacob Hill accepting. Brad Harper with Eric Harper. Ricky Pierce, accepted by Chris Pierce. Randolph Potts, accepted by Tim Potts. Chauncey Ray, accepted by Chauncey Ray III. Brett Tarver, accepted by Dick Heish. Well, I'm sure those that weren't here today will be delivered to them so that they will have those at their home and understand that we haven't forgot them and how important they are, not only in the past, but more as we go into the future. Okay. I think we're going to go back to call to the public. And Joanne Woods, if you would like to come up. I think you have 2 minutes. I think it's 2 at subcommittee, isn't it? 2 minutes at
gosh.
subcommittee.
Okay. I'm not going to introduce myself. I'm a family representative for Justice for Remain Brisbane.
Wait a minute. Is her microphone turned on? Okay,
Okay.
now we can hear you.
Okay. I am family representative for Remain Brisbane, who is a black man killed unarmed by a white police officer in Phoenix. I want to request that the City of Phoenix City of Heroes banners be extended to the category of fallen citizens whose family have had successful lawsuits against the police department and their officers. These citizens are heroes, and also that they made an untimely sacrifice, changing the course of justice and making our city safer for others. Fallen citizens, by their death, create outstanding achievements for both the community and the police. Michelle Cousteau's lawsuit specified the creation of a mental health squad. Remains Brisbane death revitalized the city manager's outreach task force. In 2011, 150 body cams were put in place, and last month, 150 more were approved again. So we have 300 out of 29 officers outfitted with body-worn cameras. Secondly, there's now training for all law enforcement that was developed and approved. Thirdly, I believe there's a fleeing suspect policy now in place, and currently our coalition is meeting with the Assistant Chief and Marshall Franklin about funding policies for police accountability for all body cams on all officers and all vehicles with dash cams. This protects both citizens and police. An early intervention system that identifies officers at risk for violent behavior. It's non-punitive. It makes recommendations that could possibly save not only lives, but careers as well. Anthony Arambula, Michael Manning was attorney for Danny Rodriguez. Does that mean I'm over? Okay. This is a step in reconciling families, the community, their children, and the police.
Thank you. Next is Kim Baker. Shirley.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Real brief. I want to take our minds back a couple of months ago when we were all awakened to our police chief home being invaded, if you would, by bounty hunters. And I want to just ask everyone to reflect on how that made you feel when you saw the police chief home being attacked, the possibility of his family being hurt, harmed. I want you to reflect on that because I want to take you to January 25th, 2012. I gave that letter to Mr. Nowalski and Mr. Dohoney back on October 14th, where I condemned the police report and answered to my concerns. I thought someone would have the decency to contact me and further my inquiry. However, that has not happened. I don't know why, again, my concerns are given less measure than what they deserve. I know Officer Sullivan resigned after I filed a complaint against him. Gave him an out where he didn't have to answer. For your police department and police chief to put another officer in that car out in Tempe on January 25th is an injustice to the officer that they're now using. I'm not going to bring charges against that officer because I know he's not the one that was in the car. This is scandalous at best. Scandalous at best. Ms. Williams, I don't know if you remember me, but you and I did community work together years ago. I'm the same Kim Baker. However, maybe these officers don't know who I am, but I believe in the rise of the Phoenix. My time is up. I want my concerns to be addressed, Mr. Mahoney. You have a copy of this letter. I'm reiterating again.
Thank you very much. Barry Hernandez?
Good afternoon. My name is Viri Hernandez, and I'm here on behalf of the One Phoenix Coalition. The One Phoenix Coalition for over a year has been advocating and asking the city to research about what is happening in the lack of identifications and the thousands of people that are affected every day due to a lack of ID. There are thousands of people living in fear who do not call the police to report crime, who are being arrested as victims and witnesses of crime. Just last week, November 4th, a few weeks ago, when you guys had your meeting, there was one more person that was deported when he was a witness of a crime. Instead of helping and resources, we are having and continuing to allow people to live in fear. There are thousands of people who are living homeless, and the only reason that they cannot be homed and housed is due to a lack of ID. There are thousands of people who cannot volunteer in their kids' school, who cannot go chaperone a field trip, who cannot have lunch with their kids, and the only reason is a lack of ID. Several school boards have now passed resolutions to allow municipal IDs to be used in order to volunteer at those schools, yet we have seen inaction from council for over a year. Over 3 years since this need has been discussed. Last public safety subcommittee, it was requested for this item to be on the agenda. I once more do not see it on the agenda, and we're asking council to move forward and to push this forward. We're extremely disappointed by the inaction of this urgent measure and the countless families that continue to live in fear, the countless individuals that continue to be homeless, the countless individuals and students who don't continue to not have their parents in their schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is, I believe it's Norman Jimenez.
Hi. Good afternoon.
There you go.
Yes, there we go. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Norma Jimenez, and during the last subcommittee, I came with another Block Watch member, and she asked for the One Phoenix ID to be put in the agenda, but it hasn't been put in the agenda for this meeting, and we're just really concerned, as there are many of our Block Watch members and community members that really want to be able to participate in their communities, but because they don't have an ID to present when they want to go somewhere, then they can't. So I'm just here on behalf of the community members that really want to have somewhere to participate and be volunteers, and you know they want, and also because they're Block Watch members, a lot of the times they want to report crime, but they can't because they don't have a form of identification to report that crime. So I just ask that you please put the One Phoenix ID item on the agenda.
Thank you. Aldo Gonzalez?
Hello, my name is Aldo Gonzalez. I am here on behalf of an organization named Lucha. We have over 700 members. I do the immigration services for Lucha. We help them apply for citizenship, for DACA, and basically we empower the community. I'm come here to talk about the One Phoenix ID. There's a lot of people that are living in fear, including my own family, because of lack of ID. If a family member wants to go to a school and volunteer or help out with their kids, they can't do that because of that. And this, I don't know how else to show my frustration, but I come here to ask what has been the holdup. Is there something that could be done to move this along? Because my family's life is at hold, and I'm just really frustrated. So I ask you to please move this forward, and hopefully we can get this resolved and build a better community, a safer community, and the Phoenix that we all want to see. So thank you for letting me speak, and thanks.
Thank you. The last speaker is Odyssey Alvarado.
Hi, my name is Odyssey. I'm here to ask to put back the One Phoenix ID back onto the agenda because I feel really close with this idea, not just because it's an ID that we can give to people who aren't part of this nation, but also because it's such a great idea to put you put tons of cards into this one, and it costs, I believe it's around $5 to print off one alone, so you go to the park. That's another $5, and you're not paying for it yourself, it's the city that's paying for it. So if we can put this all onto one card and just pay for one card, I believe it's a great idea, because you're saving money not just for ourselves but for the taxpayers as well, because we are not paying out of pocket for this. Thank you.
Jessica Rubio.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Rubio. I'm here to speak about the municipal ID as well. This is an urgent matter for me. My mom was here last time too, and she explained how she was a victim of domestic violence. And this is an urgent issue for me because there is a lot of other victims of domestic violence who are really scared to report crimes whenever this happen because their husbands, like in my case, their husbands are telling them that they're gonna get deported as well. And so instead of calling the police, they're actually just getting hit. And so please consider this item to be put into the agenda. This is urgent. This is happening every day to so many other mothers and women. And so please put that. Thank you.
That's all the cards.
That's all the public comment cards. Thank you.
Once again, I'd like to thank everyone who put in a card for the public comments. It's so important that we get to hear the concerns from our citizens, and that's the chance that during public comment that we can hear your opinions and your comments. We're not allowed to respond back, but in the future agenda items, we can probably come up with some solutions or some ideas for y'all. So thank you. With that, we're on item number 5. It's for information only. There's no presentation. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions.
Thank you for the report.
Alrighty, so then with that, we'll go straight into item number 6.
These are for consent. Do you want a motion for 6 through 11?
Okay, we have a motion for items 6 through 11. Is there a second?
Second.
Alrighty, we have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. We're on item number 12. Mr. Remus has a whole staff with us today. This is the first time we see your whole team.
Chairman Nowakowski, members of the subcommittee. You're correct. I'm Tom Remus. I'm here with the Office of Government Relations, and I did bring our entire office today. Sitting next to me, we have John Wayne Gonzalez, who manages our state program, then James Orlowski, who manages our federal program, and Katia Hidalgo, who manages the citywide grants program.
Actually, she manages the other three, right?
She also does
Sorry.
that.
I know the feeling, don't worry.
That is correct.
So today we're here before you seeking input on the public safety portion of our state and federal agenda. As you know, our process each year is that we go out to city departments, solicit input on any ideas of issues that need to be addressed at the state or federal level. We then circle back with the city council offices, receive more input from you and your staff, and now we've been coming to subcommittees to provide additional input. So today we're not here for action. We hope to hear from you as we present what we have pulled together so far. We will be going back to the policy committee on December 8th. At that time, there'll be action on our state and federal agenda. But before we get there, there will be plenty of opportunity for you, your constituents, others to provide us feedback to put into our report. One item that we include in our state and federal agenda each year are our guiding principles. On the state side, we want to make sure that the state is not shifting any new responsibilities onto the city without any accompanying funds. Additionally, we want to protect the ability of the mayor and council to set policy at a local level. Additionally, we want to oppose any reduction to the state shared revenues that come to the city of Phoenix. As you know, that's approximately 34% of our general fund budget. A new item that we included last year and we thought was so important to include this year is, again, protecting our water resources. And if you were at the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee, you might have heard there was a lot of detail given there of some important issues that we want to watch this coming year. On the federal side, we have two guiding principles. The first one deals with the fair share of federal funding. As you'll hear from James later in the presentation, we're always trying to make sure that the City of Phoenix is getting our fair share of federal formula dollars. A lot of times those formulas are a bit skewed so that East Coast and older cities might get a larger portion than growing West Coast cities. Additionally, we also want to protect our local authority by opposing any unfunded mandates that might come down from the federal government. With that, I'm going to turn the agenda over to Mr. Gonzalez, who will start talking about some of the issues that we wish to receive your support on in the state agenda. Some of these are preemptive. We're looking to get some early support from you to either oppose or support some ideas that we've seen come before us before. Additionally, there'll be some bill proposals. So what we'd like to do is if we get direction and input from this committee, when we come to policy, we'll actually have bill language for you at that time so you could look and make sure that you're comfortable with it. After Mr. Gonzalez finishes, Mr. Orlowski will then step into the federal proposals, and then Ms. Hidalgo will close talking about some of our successes that we've received in the public safety arena when it comes to federal competitive grants. So with that, John.
The first issue on the state agenda we're bringing before you, this is an issue that actually the council has addressed in the previous session. As you will recall, a couple of years ago, there was legislation that was enacted to prohibit the use of electronic benefit transfer cards to be used at liquor and gaming establishments as well as sexually-oriented businesses. The way the legislation was written, it doesn't really allow local law enforcement to take care of the sexually oriented business section of that state law. So we have been working with State Representative Kate Brophy-McGee per her request to continue to try to get to that language that allow not just Phoenix Police but law enforcement agencies from around the state to enforce this measure. This measure was passed by the state because it was a federal mandate on the states to have such a requirement. So we would be seeking the permission to continue working with Representative Kate Brophy-McGee in getting that language addressed and hopefully maybe taken care of this session. An issue that, again, came before the council last session, as you will recall, there was a piece of legislation that was introduced that would have eliminated the pawn shop fees that police departments collect for transactions at those establishments. For the city of Phoenix, that is important. Phoenix charges a $3.50 per transaction fee, and those monies go to support the police department's unit that handles this area. In fact, the monies that are recovered cover about 70% of the actual unit's the cost of the actual unit. Also, the amount of the value of the stolen materials that have been found through the technology and the unit's ability to use this fee to pay for all that, they were able to find and recover and return almost $750,000 just in Phoenix alone. That doesn't count the other agencies. So again, we would be coming before the council to ask the ability to oppose any efforts to eliminate or reduce the pawn shop fees. And another issue that's been before the council several times. The city of Phoenix, cities used to have the ability to license those individuals that go into homes and install alarms, burglar alarms. And what happened several years ago is the state took over that process. Since that has occurred, there have been attempts at the legislature to eliminate the criminal background check. And that is of great concern to the police department. Based on the experience that the city had for decades in doing the licensing, they have found that large numbers of people with felony and misdemeanor convictions that were trying to get licensed. And so they have the experience and history and information to show that this is an important measure that needs to stay in place for those people who are going into individual homes and businesses and installing these types of alarm systems. So again, council, we would be coming before council asking for the ability to oppose any legislation that weakened or eliminated that background check. Also, an issue that is coming to the surface is the city, county, and state's 911 infrastructure. Basically, what's been occurring is that in 2001, the state adopted a charge, and it was a 37-cent monthly charge on landline, cell phone lines. Those monies would go towards the 911 fund. What's happened over time via statutes, that number has been coming down. In fact, over time, it came down to 20 cents back in 2007 and has been flat. That's set by state law. Those revenues that are coming in are not covering the expenses that are needed to pay for the technology upgrades, the redundancy systems that are needed for the entire network. In addition, there have been some sweeps of the overall state's 911 fund since 2011 that have hurt the ability to have those revenues and have those dollars there to pay for the infrastructure. So one thing in collaboration with the fire department and city manager's office is looking at the potential of creating a study committee at the legislature which would look at all the aspects. So we would hopefully have a study committee created in summertime of next year, bringing all the different groups, because this is not just a City of Phoenix issue. This is a statewide issue. In fact, in our meetings that we've been having with legislators in rural Arizona, whether it's Yuma, whether it's Casa Grande, Prescott, or even as recently as yesterday in Flagstaff, we're getting great feedback by a lot of legislators that they know that there's an issue, they want to address these issues, and they're looking to take a role and a part of it in working with the City of Phoenix in trying to figure out how do we come up with the resources we need to be able to take care of the technologies that need to come online. So that is something we would be coming before the mayor and council with approval, to seek approval for those issues. And finally, this is an issue that is not in your city council report, but it's an issue that's been discussed, and we felt it was so important that we brought it to your attention in this PowerPoint slide. So what's been going on recently is that we have a lot of schools that are coming online, that are trying to get the permits that they need to be able to open and to open for school classes. What we've been finding out is basically that the state fire marshal doesn't necessarily have the resources to meet the demand with all these schools that need to come online. So we've been having schools actually coming to the city, asking for the ability for the city to help them through the fire marshal's office, through development services, get the permits, the inspections, and the permits they need to be able to open up in time. And the issue is that the state law does currently have some barriers that would get in the way of the fire marshal and city staff from being able to assist. So one thing that staff is going to bring forward to the council in December with language is potentially look at create the opportunity for schools to voluntarily come to the city if they so choose and come and ask for support or for the city to get involved with inspections of their schools if the state fire marshal's office is not addressing their concerns right away. So again, it'd be option, not a mandate, but right now state law doesn't give us that flexibility. And so we want to be able to see if we can seek a change in state law to allow that to occur. And that is pretty much all I have for the state issues. I'll take any questions on the state items. Are there
Questions on the state issues or items? Well, John, I just have a couple, just recommendations. Anybody who's out there listening that wants to get involved. I mean, these are issues that address the city of Phoenix, but we have a team here that advocates for these issues. But also, if you can call your state reps or your state senators and advocate on your behalf too, and your community's behalf, because sometimes when the city talks, it's one thing, but when they start hearing it from individuals that get those individuals elected on these issues, it's really, it goes even more so. What's really alerting is the alarms and the background checks. Individuals that are putting in your cameras in your houses and your alarm systems and all that might be potential thieves or so. It's not right. So that's one of the things that really concerns me. I know that we as a city of Phoenix were one of the first ones to require a background check and using fingerprints as a basis of criminal backgrounds. And we were the leaders in that. And now it seems like we're taking a couple steps backwards. And the whole pawn shops, I mean, those fees and the system that we have and working, it was about 4 years ago or so where we really upgraded our computer system and working with the industry itself and all the stakeholders and how it really has cleaned up that whole industry and really kept it as out of the criminals and thieves using the pawn shop as a way to sell stolen goods. So that's something that's really important for us as a city to make sure that those fees are kept and that they don't wipe those fees away, because it's really a tool that our police officers use to capture those individuals that are stealing and robbing from our homes. Thank you. Councilwoman.
Thank you. One of the things that I think is a priority of this council is that land use is a local decision, and so as there are discussions about issues such as liquor licenses or location of medical marijuana facilities, it's really, I think, at least for me, a priority that we protect the city council's ability to weigh in on those issues, because we know our land use decisions better than anyone else. So we had some good successes on that last year, and so I hope that will continue to be a priority. And then for District 8, continued support for the state mental hospital and the safety issues related to that are still our priorities.
Thank you. Councilmember Pastor.
I have a question about the 911. In the state, there was a statement made that revenues have been going down. Is that due to nobody purchasing cellular plans, or is that due to it being swiped? I just need some clarity on that.
Yeah, from a big picture overview, when the tax was put in place and it was set at 37 cents, I wasn't involved with those early discussions. The legislature felt at that time that the revenues, as the cell phone business was going to increase, they felt that at the same time they could reduce the rate, which is now went down in statute to 20 cents, which is the current rate and locked in. There's a lot of different variables as to why the revenues are not there. The sweeps are part of it, but as far as the revenue streams and the needs are growing faster than the revenue streams. But if you want a little more specific information as to why, we have Liz Graber in the audience, who oversees the 911 call center here in Maricopa County region. So I don't know if you would want to get a little more intake from somebody who actually works on this day to day.
I think I got a clarity, because at one point it was 37 cents, and then now it has been reduced to 20 cents. And for how long is the statute? It's forever, or?
Well, the statute is definitely locked in and can be changed. I think, not to get into too deep into the minutia, the question would be, if you did raise it, how would that require a supermajority vote at the legislature? Not impossible. But because could potentially raise revenues at the state, which would be dedicated for 911, there are some challenges, but they're not challenges that can't be overcome.
And so what I'm also hearing is the cost for technology is greater than what the revenue is.
Correct. And Mr. Chairman and Councilwoman, actually, we'd be more than happy to, with all council members, provide a little more detail with Liz Graber and her team coming in, showing the actual revenue flows. I've seen the charts, and you can see where the expenditures versus the revenues are not matching up. But we can go into just the specific details on that if you'd like as well.
Thank you.
And the other thing is that if you can keep myself abreast of any issues regarding an ID card at the state level. We had individuals that were giving testimonies earlier. So if there's any talk or any changes at the state level, I'd like that to be brought to my attention also.
Certainly.
Any other comments? Okay.
So with that, Chair Nowakowski, I'll turn it over to James Orlowski to talk about issues to be included into the federal agenda.
Thanks, Tom. And to go ahead and jump into the federal legislative component of our legislative agenda, the first slide we have is talking about Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And the big high priority topic in this area is the Urban Area Security Initiative, or UASI funding. It's funding that the federal government distributes to regions across the country based on a series of data points, one of which is their risk factor. And basically what we're looking for here is, because we're ranked against all the other cities nationwide, we really want to fight to preserve our ranking compared to the other UASI regions, demonstrate to the federal government that there is a need there, and preserve that funding that comes to the city and is distributed to the region. It's really critically important. You see the picture on the PowerPoint slide there. Councilman Nowakowski had the opportunity to come out and give a presentation and did a tour with Congressman Gosar regarding the importance of UASI funding. I think it was a great opportunity for the congressman to get to see and really appreciate hands-on exactly what that funding does for the region and see some of the assets that funding has paid for. And so we're in the mode now where we have the funding and we want to be able to maintain that capability in the region. So that's critically important.
I have a question on that. How does the amount we receive compare to some of the other cities?
Yeah, so
Last I knew, we were rated lower than we should be.
Yeah, so Councilman Williams, that's a great question. Essentially what the feds do is they break it up into different tiers. So tier 1 cities are your New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles. They get sort of more funding than the other lower tier cities. We're currently in a tier 2 city category, and so the funding that we derive is based on that tier that we're assigned. The fear would be that if we continue to drop in the ranking, that we could drop out of that tier, and by virtue of that happening, that we would get a lower amount of funding. We've been sort of either holding place or slightly dropping in our sort of number ranking. However, we're still sticking in that tier 2 category, and so we're still maintaining that same level of funding, but the fear again would be that if we were to continue to drop, that we would then drop in the funding that we get.
Yesterday on the news, I was watching, because of La France situation, they had a map of U.S. states that were high risk, and Arizona was on there. And I thought, yes, maybe that will help elevate that we can promote that, we are a high risk area.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the challenges that we have, is going back to the federal government and to the Department of Homeland Security to keep up the messaging about, there are risk factors here. We think there are a lot of Homeland Security related issues, and making sure that information is taken back to the feds and it's correctly interpreted as they're working through that information nationwide and figuring out where everyone kind of stands relative to one another. So,
thank you.
And just piggybacking off that, I think it's really important that we meet with our congressional delegation and actually give them tours of our facilities and allow them to understand what it is to have this facility that we have. It's not just for the city of Phoenix, it's really used for the whole state. And I think that's one of the educational points that the congressman was bringing out, that we're a tier 2 city, but we should really be a tier 1, being so close to the border. One of the problems that we have is because Maricopa County doesn't touch the border itself, that's why we're categorized as a tier 2. So I think as long as we educate individuals in Washington, D.C., and letting them know that Phoenix and that we are close to the border, and that this is probably the first stop from individuals when they do cross the border and doing terrorist acts, that we are a big target. And that if you look around all the recent terrorist acts, they had some kind of base out of Phoenix or Arizona. So it's kind of scary, and seeing that our funds are being cut. So we need to tell our story, and we need to tell the federal government how important it is to continue with these resources, and that we share the resources throughout the whole state. Thank you. Councilmember.
Oh, wait, I don't.
Okay.
So I guess with that, segueing into the police department component of our federal legislative agenda, the slide calls out all of the priorities point by point. However, I just wanted to highlight that really our big endeavor in this area and priority is derived from federal public safety funding. We get a lot of federal grant funding that's competitive in nature from both the Department of Justice, as well as some other areas of the federal government. One example that's high profile certainly is the COPS office, which distributes COP hiring and community policing development grants. So just want to call that out. We were very fortunate this year, and my colleague Katia here will talk a little bit more about some of the successes that we've had in that area. But just wanted to call out the fact that we've been successful in getting some federal funding in that regard in order to hire more police officers. Also, we do get Bureau of Justice assistance grants. One example, again, would be the Smart Policing Initiative grant that we were successful in receiving, which is going to pay for more on-body cameras for police officers in our police department. And so really what we're talking about in this area is positioning the city to be successful to get some of these federal public safety grants, really doing that legwork to get those grants to benefit our public safety teams. We also talk about some of the specific needs that our police department has. One notable example, of course, is body-worn cameras, like I already mentioned. DNA capacity enhancement and backlog reduction is another, and the police department also has what I classify as sort of public safety technology enhancements. And one example of those would be, equipping patrol officers in the department with smartphones, essentially. And so we would look for federal grant funding opportunities to pay for those types of enhancements. And finally, the fire department component of our agenda. And again, we're really focused, as we are in the police arena, on those competitive funding opportunities through the federal government, most notably the Assistance to Firefighters, or AFG grant, and also the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response, or the acronym is SAFER. We really look to those opportunities in order to hire firefighters, also train and equip them. And again, we've been successful in that arena in getting some of those federal funds, and want to continue to advocate and look for those opportunities and position ourselves to be successful when it comes to those funding opportunities. One final thing before I turn it over to Katia that I wanted to mention that's in your agenda. There's not a slide about it, but we do also have an item in there for unmanned aerial systems, or drones. And basically our intent there is to monitor what's going on at the federal government. There are some developments in the arena of the Federal Aviation Administration, some talk about doing a registry program. And with the developments here locally and looking at a local ordinance, we just wanted to call out the fact that we're tracking that at the federal level, and we'll be providing information about that. With that, I'll turn it over to Katia Hidalgo to talk a little bit more about our grants process and working with our DC team and some of the successes that we've had.
Do you guys have any questions? Good afternoon. I serve as a citywide grants coordinator within our Office of Government Relations, and as my colleagues have stated, our police department and fire department have been very successful in competing nationally for these competitive grants. Specifically with our police department, this year they received the hiring grant, and Phoenix was actually one of 3 cities that received the highest award, as well as amount, and that's just over $3 million to hire 25 police officers. So congratulations to our police department. And then they also in 2013 received an additional hiring grant, COPS hiring grant, to hire 15 police officers, and that was just close to $2 million for those police officers. And then in addition, in 2013, Phoenix received the $50,000 micro grant, and this was for their BEST team, which stands for the Business and Economic Stability Team. And this team dismantles groups that are victimizing Phoenix businesses. So this was a great award. And then under our BJA grants, we received the 2015 Intellectual Property Theft Enforcement Program. That's just close to $300,000. And then, of course, as James mentioned, our police initiative, our smart policing initiative, that was for the body cameras. Our fire department continues to receive grant funding as well. And keep in mind that all of these grants that we work through our department, I work with our department grant liaisons to make sure that they notify us and keep us in the loop when they're competing for grants. Our fire department received over $13 million in FEMA grant funding over the last 2 fiscal years, specifically our 2015 AFG grant. This was for the Incident Safety Officer System Training Program. This was a regional effort. And then also they received over $313,000 for the automatic chest compression devices. And the other thing, Chairman Nowakowski, I know that you mentioned that the SAFER grant is a top priority, I know for this subcommittee, but also for the citywide. SAFER continues to be a priority within our department. In the past, we've been awarded over $29 million in SAFER grants, and we will continue to pursue future funding under this categories for our fire department. Overall, with this particular grant, 98 firefighters have been hired. So it's very successful, very competitive, and we also work with our federal lobbying team to review and edit our applications so that they are competitive and we get as many grant awards as possible to the City of Phoenix. And if you have any questions related to grants, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Tom.
Any questions? Councilmember Gallegos.
You offered congratulations to the police department and echo that as well, but congratulations to the government affairs team on a very successful year. It's exciting and a real compliment to our city when the federal government says that we are leading in the way. And Councilwoman Pastor and I got to meet with the Bureau of Justice, and they were asking us questions about our body camera pilot and really trying to learn from Phoenix as a best practice leader. I think it speaks well of our city that we're investing in community response, body cameras, and really trying to, as well with our firefighting and trying to be out on the forefront. So thank you for your work in that area. In terms of next year going forward, no surprise to anyone here, would love it on the public safety side that we look for opportunities on stormwater, and I did see that reflected in the memo. So thank you. That I think is new in the memo and much appreciated. Cybersecurity also is a huge priority as well. I think we're going to have a lot more expenses coming to us as there's additional cybersecurity regulations, and the more we can do to reduce those costs to the taxpayers, the better. I also did want to ask about rape kits. So we shared, our office works a lot with different women's groups, and we'd shared information from the police department about the backlog of rape kits and got very strong feedback from the advocacy community that they don't think where we need to be, and they've shared with us information about other jurisdictions from Tempe to Tucson that did receive federal funds, district attorney funds, to reduce the backlog. And then there are cities that have announced that they, such as New York, have eliminated that backlog. So could you give us any information about the opportunity to apply for funds and try to test more rape kits?
Chairman Nowakowski, Councilwoman Gallego, we will work with the police department and circle back with you on that opportunity, and we will always keep our eyes open for every grant-funded opportunity out there, but we'll make sure that we're putting an emphasis here as well.
Thank you.
So congratulations on all the awards, because I know how difficult they can be in writing those grants and under a lot of pressure of making sure all the items are there. I do want to congratulate Gatia, who is here today for this meeting, but she will be getting married this Saturday.
Ooh.
And I want to congratulate her in her new endeavor, but wanted to acknowledge that because she is here for this meeting, as she will be getting married this weekend and needs to prepare. So,
Well, let's see the ring. Come on, let's show off the ring.
so congratulations.
And just closing remarks, just really want to thank our police and firefighters for everything they do. And I mean, when we have departments that come in from across the country to look at our training facilities and to look at the best practices of our city of Phoenix. And they take those best practices back to their homes and back to their cities. And it just shows, it's a testimony of all the hard work and dedication that the men and women we have in uniform have on a daily basis, and how people are actually coming down here, not just with our police and fire, but also our court system across the street. And it's a testimony of the hard work and the dedication that our upper management has and all the men and women that serve in public safety. So thank you so much, and let's continue getting those grant monies.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Nowakowski. And before we leave, just one more thank you to all the city departments. As you know, government relations is a small division at the City of Phoenix. We couldn't do what we do without the help of all the city departments, whether that's putting together information for these reports, our lobbying efforts at the state and federal level, as well as on the grant. So I just want to extend that out to everyone as well. A big thank you to the city departments for their work and for your support. So thank you.
And with that, we are at item number 13. Assistant Chief.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Mike Kurtenbach here on behalf of the Police Department. I'll be providing an update on the implementation of the First Responder Traumatic Incident Support and Response Task Force recommendations. Now, in the Phoenix Police Department, as throughout the city, we recognize that our employees are our greatest asset. Their physical and emotional well-being is paramount, and we are committed to fostering an organizational culture that makes our employees' total wellness a priority. In the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, the wellness, in that report, it was stated very clearly that the wellness and safety of law enforcement officers is critical not only to themselves, but to their colleagues, to the organization, and quite frankly, to the community that they serve as a whole. In November of 2014, the city manager formed a task force to inventory existing city programs and training for first responders who have experienced a traumatic incident, and they look to identify potential gaps and opportunities to enhance services offered to them. The task force met in subsequent months and came up with 17 specific recommendations that were divided among 4 specific categories. Those categories are prevention, post-critical incident, treatment modality, and administrative support. In April of this year, Chief Yonner began implementing substantive changes within the police department focused on enhancing the health and well-being of our employees. Initial efforts involved the incorporation of training curricula into this year's 40-hour module down at the academy. In fact, the very first class that is offered during that 40-hour training module is done by detectives from the Employee Assistance Unit, and it's focused on the signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Immediately following the PTSD class is a health and wellness class that is offered by an outside vendor, Heart Fit for Duty. If you aren't familiar with the Heart Fit for Duty program, that program specializes in the prevention of heart attacks and strokes among first responders by focusing on early detection and education. Additionally, and prior to the release of the task force recommendations, Chief Yonner recognized the need to bolster our employee assistance unit. Previously, there were only 2 detectives that were assigned to the unit, and there was not a dedicated sergeant. Now, there is in fact a dedicated sergeant, and there are 4 new detectives assigned to EAU. The EAU personnel provide confidential communication and support to all of our employees. This can be done directly, by phone, text message, in person, whatever the case may be. This contact can be self-initiated or it can come from a third party. That third party could be a supervisor, a colleague, a family member, a friend. This unit also created an online self-service support tab that is available to our employees on an intranet site, what we refer to as Police Point, so that they can access that information at any time. Some examples of information that our employees can access are our peer support list, which includes 60 sworn and 16 civilian staff with their contact information that they can speak with at any time, our critical incident stress management program, information on counseling services that are available, perhaps through the Employee Assistance Program or the Mental Health Network, substance abuse screening and programs, and our police chaplain program. In September, a police department implementation team was formed consisting of representatives of all of our labor organizations, city HR, and then specialty units within the police department to include our training bureau, our professional standards bureau, our legal unit, our police HR, and that effort is co-chaired by Chief Renteria and myself. Now, this implementation team has met and assigned the 17 specific task force recommendations to those specific work units or details that is appropriate for them to coordinate. We've developed an implementation matrix, and we're tracking our progress toward implementation of each of the respective recommendations. In addition to these 17 recommendations, the implementation team believes that there would be tremendous value in hiring a mental health professional that would be assigned to the police department to complement the work of the Employee Assistance Unit. After conducting research, the implementation team learned that the Tucson Police Department has had a mental health professional on staff for approximately 10 years. On October 6th, 7 members of the implementation team, to including the acting HR director and myself, made a day trip to Tucson to meet with Police Chief Villaseñor and his staff, which included Dr. Luz Cornell, who is the clinical psychologist within their behavioral sciences unit. Now, the TPD provided members of our implementation team with insight into how their unit works, policies, scope, and answered various questions. This information is currently being evaluated by the internal implementation team to determine if such a position is in fact a viable option for the police department. This concludes my presentation.
Any questions? Councilmember Williams?
Could we have a copy of the matrix, the 17 goals that you're working on?
The status of the goals,
Yeah, what they are and what the status is.
we can provide both.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other comments? Councilmember Cagle?
Many thanks to you and the task force for your extensive work on this. It's very important to the success of our city and our police department. Could you help us understand sort of the breadth of the problem? You mentioned adding additional officers to the EAU, and what would be the caseload or number of individuals and families each officer might be working with, and how pervasive is this need?
So, Mr. Chairman and Councilwoman Gallego, thank you for the compliment. I think it's fair to say that it varies. Oftentimes, we look at critical incidents such as an officer-involved shooting or a line of duty death as we recognize losses today, and those are ones that really come to the surface where affected employees are offered resources. But the reality is, as with any other profession, life happens, and there are times that our employees may need a hand with counseling services, maybe just a friend, somebody to direct in the right direction to ensure their overall health and well-being. What we found in law enforcement as a whole, and previously I referenced the President's Task Force report on 21st century policing, is that culturally, and when I came on a little bit over 25 years ago, we weren't necessarily encouraged early on in my tenure to emote or to articulate that there was a concern regarding an issue. Under Chief Yonner's leadership, we're slowly but surely changing that paradigm. And that's where those detectives and that sergeant assigned to the Employee Assistance Unit are so critical. Because not only do they sit in an office at police headquarters at 620 West Washington, but they're going to briefings. They're interacting with their colleagues. They're developing substantive relationships with the men and women of the Phoenix Police Department, sworn and our civilian professional staff, so that we can identify issues on the front end before they become perhaps more pervasive or more significant on the back end. So what we're trying to do is, we'll always be reactive when critical incidents occur, but we're taking concrete steps toward being more proactive. And it really addresses that overall culture. That's where I think Phoenix is on the cutting edge of doing that, and why we believe there would be value in having a staff psychologist on the police department. Our police officers in the Employee Assistance Unit have received additional training, but they're not clinical psychologists. So if you can put those two together, as we've seen in Tucson, we think there would be benefit, again, for the individuals, for the organization as a whole, and for the community that we serve.
Perfect sense. I think you'll see wide support from the council for adding that civilian position. Could you help us understand where a civilian might be the best resource versus an officer in the Employee Assistance Unit?
Absolutely. So, Mr. Chairman and Councilwoman Gallego, there are really a couple different schools of thought. In some of the agencies that we've researched, if you're aware, as part of our hiring process, candidates are required to go through a psychological screening. So in some agencies, they use an outside vendor for that psychological screening purpose, just like we do, and also would use that outside vendor, that clinical psychologist, to direct internal employees toward. But we believe that that would be a little bit of a, especially because we're so fortunate to be hiring right now at the rate we are, an undue burden on one individual, and we think there may be a disconnect, that we think that there was an opportunity here to have somebody in-house that could perhaps treat the most critical cases on the front end. For example, in Tucson, Dr. Cornell responds to critical incidents when it's appropriate to try and triage those incidents on scene. She keeps those patients, if you will, that are deemed to be those in greatest need. And in other cases, what she does is because she understands those practitioners that have experience in dealing with law enforcement, and I will readily admit that we are a little bit different, and some of the resources that we need can be different than the general public, that physician could then connect our employees to somebody that specializes in treating law enforcement personnel. So the overall vision would be to have somebody in-house that can ensure that our detectives and our sergeant are administering the appropriate resources, that they understand the limitations that they have since they are not certified practitioners, can treat the most critically injured of those that, the men and women that are on the department, and then connect those that need additional resources to those respective resources. So the way we view it is that clinical psychologist could really be that conduit to ensure the overall success, health, and well-being of our employees.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Williams?
Thank you. Following up on that, I understand fully, referring people, how would the psychologist follow up to ensure that the right appropriate services were received and on a timely fashion and that they were actually effective?
There are certain, and Mr. Chairman and Councilwoman Williams, there are certain resources that we have available within the department. And when you talk about a doctor-patient relationship where we could affirm and confirm that requisite services were provided. So if there were certain treatment modalities that were requested of an individual before they could return to service, and I'm not necessarily talking a work fitness evaluation, but if you think in terms of a work fitness, we can get assurances not necessarily about the type of treatment that was provided, but we can get assurances as an agency that effective treatment was provided that would allow this individual to return to full duty, or maybe it's a limited duty status, whatever the case may be. So in this case, where we talk about limitations of having a sergeant and 4 detectives, they don't have those types of protections, whereas a clinical psychologist would have those protections and that ability to interface with the employee, with an outside clinical psychologist to give assurances to the organization that that employee is fit for duty.
Okay,
If that
so
makes sense.
I'm with you, I think. Will that be confidential, that the psychologist would have the information, the diagnosis and where he's being referred, where your line officers, do they have access? I mean, how do you prevent that from being common knowledge?
To answer your question, Councilwoman, that information would absolutely be confidential.
Okay.
It would have to be kept confidential. In fact, Tucson has taken it a step farther. Their behavioral science unit is not even located in police headquarters. They quite consciously moved them to another facility so there wouldn't be potentially, when we speak of culture, any stigma associated with an officer or civilian employee that was seeking services or taking advantage of resources other than online. Something else that we're very interested in taking a look at.
I think that's very important because I remember in past years, historically, there was a real stigma attached. You didn't want to know, and I guess if all else fails and the counseling or services aren't successful, do you have a policy, or are you creating a policy that the psychologist can then recommend either very limited service or termination?
We have policies in place right now as an organization that allow us to do that. but I think this would give us yet another tool where ultimately if somebody isn't successful and they can't do this job, perhaps we can guide them in that direction to other employment. But by having a department psychologist on board, I think that's an extra layer that, and I'll talk about success again, that will give the employee the greatest opportunity for success, but in that situation where perhaps this just isn't the right profession for this individual, whether it's something egregious that occurred or for whatever reason, it just helps to move that employee down that path.
But you'll have a policy in place that places the recommendation on a high enough level that it can be reviewed and accepted by all the different review panels that has to go through it, past that?
Yes, the short answer is we'll have a very clear policy.
Thank you.
Councilmember Pastor?
I think it's a great idea moving forward into this right direction, especially having a psychologist there, being able to, them feeling comfortable to go to a psychologist, because there is a stigma in going even to a counseling, and then now going to the next level of a psychologist. But I think it also, and we try to work really hard, in my world, work really hard from that, only because we know the benefits, the great benefits it has in just the well-being of a person, and being able to understand what's triggering certain emotions or triggering certain behavior as to why it's triggering and where it really is coming from, and how to understand it and be able then to move forward and move forward in a positive manner. So I think it's a wonderful step. In addition to that, it also may help one recognize that this is not the profession that they would want to be in the sense of what it's doing to their well-being. And so it's another way of looking at it as to getting to that point where internally they probably know. It's just getting to that point to be able to recognize it. And so I think this is very healthy for us to move this way, and just in the world of our officers and their well-being. And not only is it their well-being, it's the well-being of the family and everybody that affects around them. So thank you for doing this.
And Chief, I just really want to thank you and Assistant Chief Renteria and our Chief Joe Yonner for all your efforts. I mean, the 17 recommendations and the resources that you put behind it. I mean, the 40 hours of training for health and wellness of our men and women is crucial, and hiring 2 extra officers to actually be a part of that with a sergeant. I mean, it shows that we are putting the resources behind it. It's not just a task force with recommendations that we're going to put on a bookshelf, but it's actually staffing and the resources behind it. And I like how you're using technology to its fullest, where if individuals are embarrassed to go or are afraid to go to a counselor, that they can actually go online and look for help through an app or through a website. So I just really want to thank you for the recommendations and for this task force and all those individuals that made this possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with that, I think any other questions? I think we're on item 14. I'm not sure if we have Assistant Chief Renteria.
Thank you, Chairman Nowakowski, council members. My name is Sandra Renteria, Representative Police Department, and I have Jim Gallagher, the commander over our record management system. As an update for the implementation of the record management system, in February of 2013, the city conducted an RFP process and selected Intergraph Public Safety, which is now known as Hexagon Safety and Infrastructure, as the vendor for the new record management system. The record management system that was selected was the In Pursuit module record management system. The project began in 2013, and during that time, the implementation team was developed, partnerships, et cetera, were developed to start the implementation. Also, during the last couple of years, new software, hardware, servers, computers, et cetera, had to be upgraded in order to be able to support this new program. And last month, in October 2015, the city was satisfied with the stability of the system and was prepared to implement the system. On October 10th, the soft start process began, and soft start was an 8-day period where all legacy data from PACE, our old record management system, was migrated into the new In Pursuit record management system. This was over 700 million records. During this 8-day period, PACE was turned off to view-only mode, and with our new record management system getting all the data migration, we basically were working in a paper mode process for those 8 days. And I say paper mode process, we were putting it into the field-based reporting module of the new system, but it was kept in draft form. Once the data migration was completed from PACE into our new record management system, the new system was implemented or turned on, as we kind of said, on October 18th at 0500 hours. During the first week of implementation, a full-time team of over 30 personnel from RMS, our ITB unit, the city ITS, and the vendor provided 24/7 coverage for technical and operational support of the system. During this time period, the system performed as expected, and there were no loss of data or interruption of service. We did have, on October 29th, a couple of issues. The system experienced a temporary outage resulting in a technical failure of a third-party vendor database. This was quickly addressed and resolved, and the system resumed as normal. Since then, we've had a couple of other minor disruptions in the booking module. The system in general was still functioning. It was the booking module itself that had some disruptions that occurred that, again, were addressed and since has been corrected. Some of our focus areas that we continue to work on are the booking process, because we need to continue to make sure that the process is working flawlessly. And our traffic module is also being worked on so we can make some improvements on the process. Just some statistics of what we've done so far since October 18th, being turned on to November 16th yesterday. 17,378 incident reports have been created on the new system. Over 11,000 supplements. Over 2,000 adult bookings have been created. Over 2,200 traffic accidents and over 3,000 citations have been written on the new system. Overall, while the process, we still are finding some process issues and becoming familiar with the new system. The system itself has been healthy and remains healthy and is performing as designed. And we continue to work with the vendor to make any kind of necessary improvements to the system. Any questions?
Councilmember Bagels?
Thank you for your update. I know the community is eager to have it up and working and tested. Have other communities had similar delays with their systems when they've used this vendor?
I don't know. I don't know if Commander Gallagher, you're aware of any?
Councilwoman Gaggo, members of the subcommittee, yes. Other major cities of our similar size, call volume, and complexity have experienced significant data disruption and failure. We are fortunate at this point that the system, while experiencing technical glitches, has continued to perform well and that we have not suffered any of those challenges.
Wonderful. I know the community is waiting eagerly some of the changes we'll be making when it's up and ready for more information. Councilman Nowakowski and I were at the anti-graffiti task force, and they have ambitious needs for the system should it be working where we're comfortable doing that. Thank you.
Councilmember Williams?
Thank you. I think I was a little vocal over the summer about the delays. This is over a year
little?
past.
A little?
You think I was just a, all right. I know how you're spelling that. But Are we going to go back? And I still think that we need to go back, and we paid extra a couple different times because of their delay and not having a system that really worked for us as promised and as part of the RFP. Are we going to go back and see if we can get some money back from them?
Well, I know all the information has been provided to the law department, and they're reviewing all contracts and the information that was provided to them and making decisions from there, presenting them to council before.
I'm glad to hear it's working for the most part. I'm very interested to continue to hear if all the glitches get worked out. We have a lot riding on this. We put a lot of effort into it, and we put a lot of money into it. And I just think we need to make sure that we got our money's worth and it's not a burden to the taxpayer. So thank you for staying on top of this. I know you've been right there and you've pushed and pushed and pushed. And I truly appreciate it. And I'm glad to hear that we're this far along. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Councilmember Pastor.
So I have some questions. How does this correlate with response time? How does the system work with response time?
Well, I think you're talking two different systems. You're talking our CAD system, which is part of the dispatch, and we're talking our record management system and our report writing system. So if you're asking on dispatching, I think that's under CAD, and we are looking at some CAD upgrades.
Well, what I had, conversations that I have had is that the system is really slow. And it's moving slow, and it's affecting, because of all the training and everything that's going into the system and putting the management, then it affects different dynamics. And one of the effects is response time. And the system's not talking to one another and being able to sync with one another. So I just want to get some clarity, only because those were the conversations I had regarding the new system.
Right.
And so,
I'm sorry, Council.
Go ahead.
I can tell you that this is a new system for everybody to learn. So everything is moving a little bit slower, and even though we're better now than we were, over 4 weeks ago when we first turned it on, we are still needing to improve from the user standpoint. And although this isn't perfect, and we're still working through some of the glitches and some of the things that we need to focus or enable some of our wants and needs as a department and make those changes, we also are needing to still get used to the system as an overall user component. So I'll have to give you some examples. When we first turned it on, we had the 24/7 support system there. We received over 4,000 calls the first day, and just because it was brand new, and that has overall reduced the more and more time that we have on because people are getting used to it and starting to become more familiar with it. So now instead of getting 4,000 calls in a day, we're getting a handful of calls in a day asking for some assistance. So it is a process knowledge. We're still getting used to it. It's kind of like going from Lotus Notes to Office 365. It's different. Can it do the same thing? It's just a different program. So everybody needs to get used to it. So yes, although it takes, I thought I'd give an example of something we're all knowledgeable of.
Sorry if we all winced.
Right.
We're all trying to get used to that. But yes, I hear what you're saying when it takes longer because we need to get used to a certain system. The more and more we become familiar with it, we're getting faster on it, and that will enable us to get back to calls for service.
Any other comments? Thank you so much, Chief.
Thank you.
Item number 15.
The important one.
Wow, we even have a surprise, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Councilmen, members of the subcommittee, I'm Executive Assistant Chief Dave Harvey representing the Police Department, and Ian White from the Law Department is here to talk to you regarding the information on the Humane Society contract.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, we're here today to recommend that the City Council approve the city to enter into a sole source professional services agreement with the Arizona Humane Society to provide shelter, appropriate veterinary care, and other necessary services for animals that may be held in protective custody during Phoenix Police Department operations. This agreement will provide on-scene response and investigative support to the Phoenix Police Department in situations of animal abandonment, animal cruelty, animal neglect, and injuries to animals. Currently, as you may know, the city lacks any suitable facilities for sheltering animals. We don't employ veterinary care technicians or veterinarians to provide this type of support to animals. As a result, this sole source provision would be necessary because the Arizona Humane Society is the only animal care organization in the Phoenix metro area that can provide these types of services to the city. They have the licensed and trained staff to do that. They are of appropriate size, large enough size to do so. The initial agreement, under the initial agreement, this would be for 18 months starting on January 1st. That's what we would intend for it to take effect. It would have built into it an option for 3 one-year extensions. The initial cost of this over the first initial 18-month period would not be expected to exceed $606,000. After that, annual renewals would not be expected to exceed $406,000 per year. A little bit of history here as far as our current operations are concerned and our current agreement and status quo with the Arizona Humane Society is that from 2002 until the present day today. The Humane Society and the city have been working under a pretty standard protective custody agreement, which basically allows the Humane Society to act in more of a volunteer status on behalf of the city. They don't charge fees to the city for any of their services currently. What the Humane Society, what was built into that protective custody agreement was that Humane Society would receive a court-ordered restitution as a form of payment for services rendered. But other than that, there was no cost built into it. Due to the size and scope of its operations and just the sheer number of cases that they assist the Phoenix Police Department with, this is now untenable for the Humane Society. They need compensation for their services. In the last 12 months alone, more than 6,000 animals have required the services of the Arizona Humane Society. So to continue providing the same level of custody and related services to the Phoenix Police Department without any interruption to patrol and our other investigative operations, the Phoenix Police Department, desires to continue for Humane Society to continue these services, and we would ask that they be paid in a contract with them. So this concludes my presentation, subject to your questions.
Councilmember Williams.
I want to thank the department for pursuing this. I know it's something we've worked on for a long time. We have greatly appreciated the Humane Society's partnership over these years and relied upon you to use your dollars to help us. So I'm delighted to see this. My question is it has 3-year extension, I believe you said. Is there, God forbid, the numbers really rose and the number of cases, is there an escalator clause in there or something that relates to the number of services they provide to us?
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Williams, there's not an escalator clause built into the contract at present. There are some limitations on the types of services that the Humane Society would be providing to the city. After that, the only other types of things that may impact what we'd already be paying over to the Humane Society would be the length of care for any animals seized. That would be provided for in the agreement. What all parties want to avoid is holding on to animals too long if we can avoid that. But as far as any other types of escalator clauses in the agreement, we don't have anything like that.
I'm referring to the number of animals would escalate that would require the services that are outlined. I'm hopeful that that doesn't happen. I know we all work very hard in the prevention of animal cruelty, but just sheer population continues to grow. And I just want to make sure that there's a mechanism somewhere, because 3 or 4 years can be a long time, that we can reevaluate this and bring it back. I guess it would be up to the Humane Society to tell us, or police department to give us an annual review and tell us how many animals were involved, and if there was a great difference in the services you had to provide. I mean, veterinary care could get very expensive and escalate too. So could we just set up something on an annual basis that you come back and give us a progress report or a summary of what's transpired in a year and the costs related to the number of animals served?
Mr. Chairman, Councilwoman Williams, yes, we can do that every year, and I just wanted to make sure the initial agreement is for 18 months, and then there's an option for 3 one-year extensions.
Right.
Before we came back to you, but we can provide on an annual basis an update on the services that they're providing, and if there's any type of cost increase or any recommendations from law or the police department if we had to change the contract.
And I believe our ordinances allow for restitution, do they not?
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Williams, they do provide for that, and much of that is handled at the municipal court level.
So when our officers are involved, are they working closely to make sure that that's included, that gets packaged in the full amount that goes to the judge, and that we have worked with the courts? I saw the presiding judge in here a minute ago, so I was looking around, that we have judges that are sensitive to the restitution, and if that is applied, then does that diminish what our share will be? It's kind of a three-pronged question there. Oh, we're going to pass it on, huh?
Chairman Nowakowski and Councilwoman Williams, I'm Jennifer Booth. I'm a prosecutor at the City of Phoenix. I've been handling was handling animal cruelty cases for, I'd say, 4 or 5 years. Have since moved to the Appellate Bureau. In terms of restitution, it comes to the prosecutor's office in a packet from the Humane Society through the detective, and it's a very well organized packet. It includes delineated all the costs that are associated with it. We provide that to the court as well through a restitution request, similar as what a victim would provide, but a little bit different in terms of victimization, if you will. And the court will either hold a hearing to determine whether those restitution costs are appropriate. Generally, there's no question about them, and then order them as such. And the court collects those restitution costs as they would in any other case, and they get passed on to the Humane Society, or in this case, they'd be passed on to the city.
Okay, very good.
There is a mechanism for that. Okay. Restitution collection will be the same. We'll have the same hurdles as we do with any other restitution order. Just getting someone to pay is sometimes a different battle.
But sometimes, especially if it's a second offense, if they're really slapped with restitution, they may have fewer animals in their future. That cuts down on the cruelty and the whole process if we prosecute and actually follow through and collect money.
Yes, and generally, as from the prosecution standpoint, our goal is to lessen or eliminate the ability to have animals for at least a period of time, or work with PD and the Humane Society to go out and check on, do welfare checks when needed, and so that as a group, as a team, does occur.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dagos.
Wonderful. Thank you to Councilwoman Williams for her leadership on this and for everyone involved in making sure we could address this very important need and an opportunity to learn from the Humane Society about some of the work they do and in the cases of animal cruelty, often the significant amount of rehabilitation that's needed with highly skilled staff. So I think it's very smart that we are partnering and not trying to develop this expertise, which would be virtually impossible for us to do at the same level. So I'm glad that this was able to work out and on a much faster time frame than I had thought. So thank you to everyone involved. That's going to be very good news for our community and all of the members, including the animals. So I think it speaks well to us that we are moving forward on this. I was wondering if we could introduce the people or an individual in the audience who runs the program.
Chairman Nowakowski and members of the subcommittee, my name is Jessica Amond, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager for the Arizona Humane Society. Again, I can't thank you enough for having us here today. We are really pleased with the agreement before you, and we appreciate the support from all the different departments that we have worked with. So back here in the corner, many of you know Chris West. He is the manager of our field services team. So it is really his team that are out there addressing these animal cruelty complaints and investigations and educating the public on a daily basis. I've also got Michelle Geeson. She is our Chief Financial Officer, and then Kelsey Patton, who is our Vice President of External Affairs with us as well. So again, just want to thank the City of Phoenix for your commitment to the work that we're doing and the animals in our community.
Wonderful, thank you. I thought it was valuable that we recognize the people who worked to make this happen because it was certainly a lot of work. And it was also great for me to get an education. I didn't realize how often we would have to hold animals for many, many months, both while they're rehabilitated, but also because they're evidence in court cases. That's very eye-opening. And some of the stories about specific animals really helped me understand this issue. So thank you to all for moving forward on this. Look forward to voting yes.
Councilmember Williams.
I want to move this forward with approval.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we got a double second. Any comments? I'd like to have a comment. I just really want to thank the advocates. I mean, it was incredible. It was during our budget hearings where we had testimonies. And the 3 or 4 budget hearings that I went to, there was advocates talking about this issue and having our staff react so fast. And within a year, we're able to come up with this motion, and I just really want to thank everyone who is a part of the task force, the animal cruelty task force, that were really advocates behind this whole thing. So once again, thank you so much, and thank you to Councilmember Williams for her leadership in this, and all those individuals that were out there advocating for it. With that, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Congratulations. Now we're on item number 16, the public safety budget update. Start off with police.
All right, good afternoon. Jill Sly with the Police Department. I'm going to give you an update of our budget through the end of September. Our current budget is $566 million, and for 3 months we spent $148 million, which is about 26% spent, when we should be about 25%. But we have a lot of upfront costs that we have to pay in the beginning of the fiscal year. For the month of September, we're about 8% higher than we were last year, but we have all of our ammunition budget is hit already, and then we've had additional overtime due to minimum staffing needs out in patrol. Our top 10 expenditures are basically everything is personal services except for the last item, which is jail services, and our top one is always salaries. And then for our revenues, we have our grants, court awards, vehicle impound, false alarms, pawn shop, our IGAs and task force, and our SOR and special events programs. And pretty comparable to the previous fiscal year. Any questions?
Any questions? No questions at all. Thank you.
I got off easy.
Well,
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. My name is Patricia Lucero, and I will be presenting today on behalf of the municipal court. So if we look at the first slide here, you'll see that we are at our general total budget is $27 million, and we are expenses through September 30th are $6 million, close to $7 million. So we're about 0.5% under our budget from last year. Next slide. Our expenditures, we are showing that we are about 8% less than last year, so we are doing well with that. And then our next slide is our expenditures, which the top 10 expenses, again, are related to personnel, which is the largest expense that we have. And finally, on our last slide here, our revenues collected, we are showing that we are on about 4% under from last fiscal year, so we are on track and what we're expected to see. So,
any questions?
Any questions?
I have a question. You're under. Is that due to a position or?
Well, some of it had to do with some of our vacancies from last year, where we lost one of our courtrooms in the civil division, and we've had some vacancies, and so we're still kind of staying even with our vacancies. We hire, but then we have promotional, so we're kind of where we are. Okay.
Any other questions? When the presiding judge said he's going to put you on this hot seat,
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Thank you very much.
We have our fire department.
Good afternoon. Ken Lake with the Fire Department. Thank you, Chairman Nowakowski and members of the subcommittee. I'll be presenting on the Fire Department. Much as we had anticipated, we're right at budget this year. At this point in time, it's 23% spent. It's just a little over 23% of the year, so we're right on target where we think we should be. Monthly expenditures, again, I don't really see anything that's alarming there. We're pretty much just slightly behind last year right now as far as our pace, so we're, again, just clicking right along. Top 10 expenditures, much the same as my colleagues here. Again, nothing really sticks out as far as a huge increase. We're still pretty heavy on salaries, pensions, benefits, and those kind of things. Pretty much all of them actually are down slightly. And then probably the one area that we were doing pretty good on this year, and we finished up last year, is our ambulance transports are up in terms of revenue. It's about $1.1 million so far this year. So we're anticipating a good year. Again, the system seems to be working very well, and our collection rates are up pretty good. So it's a good thing. And that was about it, if you have questions.
Any questions for my colleague? Once again, I'd like to thank you for being good stewards and making sure that we're on budget. And as individuals can see out there in the audience and on the television, that we're keeping our public safety individuals in compliance to what they've said that they're going to be. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
With that, we're on future agenda items. We have a list of the future agenda items. We have a chance to look over our future.
Sorry.
Thank you to the chairman for adding the resident identification card.
Anything else that should?
Mr. Chair? It doesn't have to be quickly, but
Right.
I believe the city has an ordinance about chaining dogs in the front yard. And I would like, if so, I would like it brought to this committee for review and maybe some changes. Thank you.
Any other recommendations for future agenda items?
So is item 5 the one municipal card, or is it different? Or can we, I would like to add that item.
Okay, we can add that there. It can be a combination of both, right? A residential identification card plus a multi-city card. Anything else? What I like to do is I like to have an update on our licensing for scrap metal dealers. Be added to that agenda. Anything else? With that, meeting's adjourned. Thank you so much.